Hello everybody, welcome to the ARU Startup Podcast, a series dedicated to enterprise entrepreneurship and startups. We will be joined by a wide range of guest speakers who will be sharing about their journey, their personal story, some valuable insights into how to start a business. So stay tuned with us to get some amazing tips and advices from these amazing guest speakers. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Let's welcome our guest for today. A warm welcome to the ARU Startup Podcast. My name is Omkar Singh, and today we have our guest, Min Lee. Min Lee is a user researcher at NHS England. She's previously worked in the NHSX as a business analyst and in a mental health care startup as a market analyst. She majored in neuroscience and mental health during her biomedical and management degree at Imperial College London before pursuing a master's in healthcare technologies at King's College London. Min Lee, we are delighted to have on our podcast.
Hi, I'm Carl. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And before we start our discussion around startups and about your company, about the app, would you like to explain how your usual day look like as a user researcher in NHS England?
Oh, that's a really great question. To be honest, like the day-to-day work differs a lot. So I work across patient-facing national channels. So that refers to the NHS app as well as the NHS website. And it's quite a volatile space managing sort of national level research. So it's pretty much what the biggest problems are that week or that month. So yeah, that's really difficult to answer. My day-to-day varies hugely, like scanning new innovations, scanning new pain points from users, mapping user journeys, looking at prototypes, looking at new ideas, compiling evidence, desk research, reading papers. So lots of different things.
Yeah, and the reason I asked this because you are also into startup. It's called a Humin app, which is more into a mental health and well-being. So it's more about when we are in startups and early stages of startup, it's about dealing and coping up with the multiple works you're doing during the daytime. So how do you manage and how do you manage yourself on the startup? You give sufficient time and also your work that goes around.
I think that's a really good question. And I feel like for students who might be listening to this, I want to say that I've experienced a lot of stigma from investors and startup community that if you don't spend your full time on the startup, and if you don't give up that typical scenario where you've given up everything and you're bankrupt, but you're going for your dreams, you're chasing your startup. And I was like, I don't have that level of risk appetite. So do I deserve to create something new? And I really want to say that now that I've done it for 2 years, I think it's absolutely not true. As long as you have an internal motivation that will keep you going, because you know it is not easy to always work on top of what you're normally sort of expected to. I think it's definitely possible. But going back to how I manage it, I think I'm going to be super honest, okay? Because I wish I could say I'm a superhuman, I'm better than everyone else, but I'm not. I'm just a normal, like, human being. I like having fun. I like having my own time. I like exercise, things like that. So my work at NHS England is not, I'm not expected to work overtime. So I'm being strategic about where my full-time commitment comes from. Right. If I was in a consulting firm right now, which I had an offer from BCG and I turned it down because I knew I would never, ever finish at 5. I would always have to work until 8, 9, 10. And I was like, do you know what? I need to be strategic about how I can protect my time to spend on my startup. And because I'm in public sector, that is a huge advantage for me so that I can protect the time. But one more tip I want to give is I can be quite volatile with my emotions. So, like, we all believe that we're amazing, right? Like, when you first start an innovation, you have this idea, you're so excited, you're like going to go, crazy about it in the next month. But it's really a marathon, seriously. And to do that, I can't trust having a flexible schedule. I just can't. It needs to be a habit. Otherwise, I know I won't do it when things are hard, which is most of the time, by the way, unfortunately. So in my calendar, I've just blocked out times at the beginning and after work, and I do not break it. because if I keep breaking it, I'm just not going to work. I'm going to be doing other things. So don't trust yourself sometimes, have a system and make yourself an environment where you'll feel awful if you break it once. That would be like how I keep going at it.
Yeah. I think this is one of the very common challenges a startup enthusiasts really face about managing the daily schedule, plus having a startup idea which they're actually passionate about, but still they're struggling to find a time in their daily routine. Having read your background, you're mostly into biomedicine, neurosciences, and mental health and all sort of things. What triggered your first thought to go into entrepreneurship?
Love this question. And please tell me to stop talking if I'm going on about something for so long. I came to England when I was 14. And God knows who thought that was a good idea. But my parents sent me here on my own. Now, that didn't go down very well with like myself looking back on it. I had a really tricky time trying to settle in. Couldn't really speak English that well. Completely different culture. Just didn't enjoy it. And I think that in me manifested into an eating disorder. I had bulimia, and I really don't mind sharing this because I talk about it on Humin's podcast channel. Like I talk about my story and like I'm very comfortable with it. But I had bulimia for a couple of years, which is when you binge eat basically and you use compensation to get rid of that calories. But I had that for many years, and to be honest, it's a long story short, but I never really recovered from disordered eating for so many, like decade that I'm talking about, until, 2 years ago or last year, it might be now as well. And I always despised it. Like, why me? Why does it have to be me? My parents have put me here. It's not my fault. I hated it. And it's excruciating to not enjoy your skin where you are because there's no way out of it. Like, every day is like a pain. And that whole experience, and I'm also quite like an affective person, like emotionally speaking, like that's one of my characteristics as a person. It was natural for me to be interested in neuroscience and mental health because what I discovered from the first breakpoint of recovery from bulimia was that it wasn't to do with my eating. Like the clinical pathways kept indicating that I had to do something about my diet to stop triggering these binge eating episodes. But it was honestly just in my mental health, like my self-worth. Why do I exist? Am I a worthy person or do I need to be skinny? Like who for? So that's when I realized that mental health is like everything because you could have the world and you will feel like a complete failure if you don't love yourself. So yeah, I went into Imperial, did biomed just because I was interested in that sort of stuff. But then as I matured into my recovery, it felt natural to do neuroscience and mental health. And to be honest, I loved it. I really loved the idea of it, although I did decided that being in labs or doing academia wasn't really for me. But that, long story short, that's why I decided to pursue mental health and neuroscience.
Thanks for sharing that one. How did you think of starting as a startup, as a business, mental health as a business, as a startup? Was there any particular story that you thought that this is worth sharing with the people? Was it your just personal story, or have you come across any other stories that you are aware of that you think, no, this has to be among the people to challenge certain issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of builds on what I've just shared. So it's crazy thinking about it now because, like I said, I despised my experience, but thinking back, they were all like building blocks of what I looked for and then what that manifested into. Because I took interest in mental health and neuroscience at Imperial, I decided to do an internship at the mental health startup that I was referring to. Now, in that company, I helped that company bring in psychedelic treatments for people living with severe depression. So people who are not responding to traditional treatment of depression, which is mostly a mix of antidepressants or other type of medication. Now, do you see what I'm saying? I wouldn't have gone into that if I hadn't developed an interest in mental health or like a majored
Yeah.
in that sort of area. And when I went into that startup, it was crazy. It was like I was interested in everything and anything around mental health, but specifically technology. I'm really interested in psychedelics as well, but I just had a very strong draw towards technology. And one thing that I developed an interest in was using technology to remotely understand how people are doing in their mental health. Um, and this is often called digital phenotyping in the industry. It's a very active industry. It's not as like early stage as some people think it might be. Lots of clinical trial companies use these sorts of technologies so that they can get more data from uh, trial participants whilst they're at home through their smartphones. So things like how much are you moving, how much are you sleeping, how are you behaving during this trial, so that you can get more data, big data, to support your clinical trials. I found that absolutely fascinating. I loved it. And I saw from my experience when I have disordered eating, I sometimes still have it now. I don't know myself. It's a really fascinating topic of like self-insight. How do you know if you're going downhill? Because it's your mind that's going downhill. It's crazy. Like you don't know. I was this confident person thinking, do you know what? I've had eating disorders for a while. I know when I'm relapsing. I actually don't. I talk myself out of it. I don't know. And this is why I thought, do you know what? If we have this data from smartphones, which is mine, which is unique to me and already personalized, could I nudge myself when I need to? Could it know how I'm doing without me recognizing that I'm not doing well? So that it would nudge me and make me realize, hang on a minute, what's going on? Like, could it be a tool to keep us in check in terms of mental health and actually give us an opportunity to find out about what's coming earlier and actually change the course of that? So it's all like a bit of luck, the fact that I joined that company and I learned about that technology. I worked on that sort of technology and then actually thought this might be really interesting. And then went sort of took that research into postgraduate studies at King's. And that's where I met my co-founder as well. And that's where I decided, complicated story, but I decided not to start a company under King's for business reasons and strategy reasons and for team reasons as well. So we had to start everything from scratch, which was hard, but well worthwhile thing to do. And that's how we started Humin, which is a mental health tech startup that is aiming to use smartphones to predict people's mental health and ultimately detect personalized patterns around their mental health so that we can intervene earlier before it goes downhill. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That was the entire explanation of the what the app does, and I'm understanding right that the app is not yet launched.
So we are currently testing our minimum viable products, so like the leanest version available, which is very exciting. So it's out there, but it's restricted to people who are testing the app.
Yeah, but just the another questions around the same thing as you mentioned about the app tracking the mental health. Is it very different to what iOS does? There's some of the auto tracking inbuilt in the phones, which automatically comes in iOS. Is it different to that one? So, for example, in the iOS we have the walking track, the health ID, the heart rate tracking. So all those tracking it does, and also the sleep patterns it does tracking. So it does track and just generate a reports every week. It depends on how often you want the report to be generated. And then based on that one, it recommends certain things.
That's a good point. So the difference is it can tap into iOS health data. It's this conversation will lead to more like data sciencey question, but let's say hypothetically speaking, it pulls on iOS data. Then the important next stage is mapping that into my mental health state and training the AI model to use those behavioral biomarkers to say, for this person, this amount of sleep and this amount of regularity in their pattern is when they are well. And as soon as this, and then you train, okay, when this person sees significant increase in how much they're staying at home, right? Which is very abnormal for me, then we can start to say or train the AI that actually this is a pattern that we see when this person is feeling very low, or on the opposite scale, these are the behavioral patterns that we see when this person is feeling euphoric, in terms of sort of conditions like bipolar disorder. So it's the next stage of computing where we're using those behavioral data to predict mental health states. And we do that by, of course, collecting, training the model at the beginning of the app. So when you first download the app, you'll have to give an input for the AI to start predicting your baseline and learn how you behave in different states. But ultimately, yes, using those behavioral data to be able to predict and then therefore extrapolate. Let's say hypothetically I have bipolar disorder, and the app knows what happens or what my manic state looks like, my stable state looks like, and my depressed state looks like. It can start to compute a cycle and predict risk factors and predict the likelihood of relapse. And my hope is to use those data to be able to have a systematic way of saying, we need to help or intervene because we can prevent this person being hospitalized. We can prevent this person from feeling so low that they're going to consider suicide. So that's what I keep going sidetracked, but yeah, that's a brief explanation of how it works.
No, I think it makes sense. I was just trying to understand because the iOS app has already got certain inbuilt things about the medical related activities and the physical activities you do. But it's good to understand that this data feeds into the app, the Humin app, and then it evaluates and generates a report on what is actually the parameters for a normal person if it's going above. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that one. Yeah. So coming back to the startup element, have you? So I'm sure you've got some market research done before you have started your business, and you already have your own personal story. Have you encountered any in your very initial stages of market research, any individual who has observed to have any outcomes coming out from the tests you have done so far? I mean, any sort of tests have been already performed in the market research. Was it effective? And if it was, what's the accuracy level of prediction it came out?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really sharp question. So let me give you a bit of info on like what sort of research we've done, because I think it'll be helpful for students to know like how much have you done for you to sort of be at where you are. Market research, I think, is what students can often start as number one. And I can't stress this enough. You have to test your assumptions. Everyone's full of assumptions, and I cannot name the number of founders who work purely based on assumptions. It's mad. You have to go and fetch data, and you'll be surprised how much you're wrong. So all of these assumptions, just because you've encountered them, you've seen something, might not be true at all. So that's what we spent 3-4 months doing. Pure research, clinical research, technical research, what's out there, looking at any data on existing mood trackers. What are the competitors? What's the B2B competition market? What's the B2C competition market? All of that is available. So we've done that, and that should give you a degree of feasibility and give you an understanding of like, okay, this is a bit of a gap. No one's doing this, and it's slightly different. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
And as soon as we've done that, what we did was create a pipeline to get users involved in the research, not once, but having a constant influx of people who are willing to share their story. And another tip here is, sounds awkward, but don't try to be efficient. So I'll try to use really practical tips. One research that we did after market research with real people was spreading a survey, and we got over 200 responses for this, and the data quality is very, very good. We did reimburse people for completing the survey, which I think was quite effective. So that was like mass research, right? But then from that, we gathered people who were willing to speak to us about their mental health experience, and a lot of people were willing to tell us about it. And that's where the real business opportunity comes from. You have to speak to people. And a lot of people don't do this because it's annoying. It doesn't feel businessy. It doesn't feel startup-y, but it really just is what will give you the true picture. So we spoke to 10 people to start with, one-to-one, 1 hour interviews that are not, just inquisitive, like what's going on? What did you try? And testing assumptions that you don't want to test. So like we ask questions like, have you used a mood tracker before? No, I never have. Have you ever thought of one? No. Would you use one? No. Why not? Because my problem isn't big enough. Then even if the user tells you that they have a problem, clearly the problem isn't big enough, and therefore you need to reconsider whether your business opportunity will be big enough and accepted. So vice versa, we've created like a pipeline already, right? We had a survey, we've brought them into an interview, and we have a relationship. We ask them, would you be open to continuing conversations with us and test stuff when it comes out? They're like, yeah, sure, go for it. So we have this people coming in of testing, and we've done so many tests so far, I can't count, but now we're at the MVP stage where we have the first version of the product and we're looking at, will it prove useful? And the reason why this links to your next part of the question around effectiveness and accuracy, I think a lot of people will have different approaches to this, but for humans context, we're very resource limited in terms of time, people. And the most important thing for us right now is, do people need this? Like, that's it, right? Do people need this, and will it change their lives? Will it solve their problems? We still don't know the answer to that in a super confident way, right? Because people behave differently to how they say they would do. Lots of people gave us incredible answers on the survey, but I'm like, I don't trust it. We'll have to give you the app. We'll have to see how you engage, whether you stick to it, whether you drop out, because that will tell us the truth. So that's where we've gotten to so far. And our plan is to basically iterate as much as we can to make sure that we are needed first. And then we can look at, okay, is it clinically effective, right? Or does it always have to stay as a wellness tool? But of course, our ambition is to be a clinically regulated medical device. Does it have a clinical impact? What are the risks? But by the way, I think risk is a slightly different problem because patient safety is so important. So although we don't have to, we've got a psychiatrist involved. We've had medical professionals involved throughout the whole journey. But it can be as casual as that, like getting some psychiatrist professionals to look at the app, talk about how the function works, and they'll pick out things like, oh, that's quite a triggering terminology. You shouldn't do that, or you should avoid that, or you should make sure that there's an emergency contact, etc., etc. So short answer, we don't know the accuracy or the efficacy in a clinical sense, but we are, currently under MVP1 testing, and we hope to have some really good feedback from this group.
Especially in your subject area, there's one area of mental health where people are not comfortable often speaking in public or even watching how worse they are in mental health when it comes auto-generates own report. And the other thing is about, we are still amid analyzing the effectiveness of artificial intelligence across the sector. There are two main challenges. Apart from this, do you see any major challenge right now you have in your startup journey?
Massive. Yeah. I think the AI regulation environment is very volatile. I cannot predict when and how the government will start regulating these technologies, which of course brings instability in early stage startups like us. Whereas, for big companies, they have the resources to know what's happening, etc. But we've just decided that we'll code our product in a way that's easily modifiable. So if you think about how you structure your program, you can kind of make it agile so that the AI system itself can be changed and it won't impact any of the other components. Another risk is, I'm going to kind of share equal sides because that's kind of my view. It's also difficult managing negative hype around AI as well. It's almost like sometimes people think it's bad because people say it's risky or there's some media talk about it. I think it's really important for us to kind of know why it could be risky as a user, by the way, and make informed opinions about how we should use AI instead. It's like fire. When mankind first found fire, did we run away from it and go, actually, that's going to kill me, I'm never going to use it, touch it again, it's bad? No, we built infrastructure around it to use fire safely and in a controlled way, right? And I feel like that applies to AI. But yeah, we don't know how this infrastructure should be used. One thing I'm worried about with big data is privacy and security, because there are so many risks about being able to track back to that person. And especially in mental health, that's a big vulnerability. I would not want my employers, for example, to know that I've had eating disorder. I just don't want them to know. And that's my choice. So that's a huge challenge. But to address that, there are always like counter ways to mitigate. So one thing that we're really keen on is something called edge computing. So using your devices as a computer rather than pulling all of your raw data and putting in the cloud and running algorithms on the cloud. So in a way, because our smartphones are incredibly powerful already, we can plant, for example, the AI models on your phone so that in a way, all your data, your carrots, your ingredients are all chopped and mixed into the soup already on your phone. So it's untraceable back to you if we pull out the post-processed data to the cloud. So smart things like those can prevent negative side effects of big data, AI usage, etc. So that's one thing that we do. But another thing really specific to mental health, I don't know if this would be interesting for loads of people, but a lot of the clinical gold standard questionnaires that we use to train AI is so outdated. So, for example, there are scales like the Young Mania rating scale or Madrid, like depression rating scales that are clinically validated to show the severity of your depression or mania, etc. Those have been developed, for example, a gold standard one like MADRS for depression, that was developed 60, 70 years ago. And it's based on subjective consultation, which is already subject to errors, but we're using that to train AI. So it's fundamentally flawed in the way that we have to clinically validate our AI models at the moment. So I'm really hoping that the government, like we at some point realize that flaw and enforce different ways of validating AI. So I'm kind of pointing out that, a big challenge for us right now is knowing that we have to train AI models with ground truth data that we believe is not ground truth per se. And that's why we're asking people to input their subjective mood and energy to begin with, because we believe that that is a better input for now, and we can deal with the clinical validation later when it comes to it. So yeah, a couple of things around AI there.
Yeah. Is it too early for you to go with the investments before the MVP, or you have already got interest from investors?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have some really good interest from early stage investors, but for everyone who's listening, got a couple of things, because we pushed back our funding a bit after experiencing what getting investment looks like. Be careful. I think it often reveals like why you want to do a startup. Is it to just raise a lot of money and, have a multi-million startup? Getting investment from venture capitals or early stage investors or other private investors is, of course, a very, very good way of getting funding for your startup, but that's not the only source. And actually, there are different scenarios where that is suitable. It's not like every startup should go through VCs in order to be successful. That's a big, big stigma. It's a big no. So the second thing is you need to be able to negotiate on equity in a way that you have leverage. So let's say, we can raise now, but will we raise in a way that we have leverage? I'm not sure about that one, because we need data to prove that we have product market fit, we will be successful, we are worthy of investment right now, and you'll get your money back, because these people are like investing in a professional manner, right? Angels are slightly different. Although nowadays I feel like angel investment has gotten a lot more conservative than what angel investment really should be, but I won't rant too much about that one. So yeah, we're bootstrapped, and we are keeping investors warm until we are kind of wanting to raise investment, which will be when we have significant data from our MVP testing.
Yeah, thanks for. And I think the other part of with the startup journey is equally important about the team building. So have you got your own team? You said you have a co-founder. And how do you manage to work together, and how easy or difficult it was for you to find a co-founder or to build a team?
Yeah, I feel like I'll separate that out. With co-founder, I got so lucky. I got so lucky. I don't know how it happened. So the story is we met at King's. We were doing the same project. And I didn't really think anything about my co-founder at first, but I looked back and he had a very consistent way of outputting effort. He was very sort of consistent rather than sort of going all in and burning out, because I needed somebody who would fill a gap that I have, which is that sort of consistency, like that tranquil sort of something that I just don't have, unfortunately. But he needed somebody with this like commitment and purpose. Like, we need to do this. It will be important, and the current state of mental health just can't be the future at all. And when I decided to leave research and do a startup, it was hard because I was leaving my protected environment for something that I wasn't sure about. Like, will I be able to run a startup by myself with no protection? Nothing. It's just me. And I just went up to my co-founder, Hugo, and said, would you come with me? And he was like, yeah. I was like, really? It's like, really? He was like, yeah, let's do that. So that's how we started. And working together with Hugo honestly just hasn't been hard. Like, I'm very, very lucky to have him. Like, I'm very grateful. Like, to me, this startup is already a success because I've met him, and it's like I can trust him, and this is itself is an experience. So like, I'm very, very lucky. So in terms of the team, right? When you start a startup at uni, just be careful, because you need to fish out who is interested in the startup, like really, and who are willing to put in the hard work. I'm not saying that university students won't put in the hard work, because that's not true. But I'm saying that it can't just be your friends just because they're your friends or just because they're nice to you. It can get so messy down the line if you do that, and you can't reverse that. And, in a startup, yes, business and product is all a pain, but when the team becomes a pain as well, unmanageable, I'd say. So for us, we've been very picky with who we work with. We have had lots of people who've sort of brushed us past. So we work with a lot of students doing internships who are willing to give up their time and sort of benefit both sides. We've been open to students who wanted to come in, learn about what we're trying to do, and do a bit of work here and there and pick stuff up and then go back to their studies, etc. But we've also have a designer, UX UI designer, because we knew that our AI product will take time to develop, and we needed somebody who had the ability to help us test the idea of a product in a realistic manner with our users before we develop them, because it's a lot cheaper. Figma is free. We can draw up what we think we'll produce very quickly, test it with our users, repeat it, iterate it, repeat it before we actually code it into a product, which is very expensive. So that's why we have Chloe, our graphic product designer. She's been with us ever since from the beginning. And the thing is, right, and this is why I have really enjoyed being in mental health, is like, it's an industry where people often feel something if you feel something. Like if you resonate with mental health, you can't deny that. And it's a big factor in getting people to help you and getting people interested in what you're doing. So building a team, like, luckily have been, not too hard. People were often like ready to step up. We also have a lead patient advisor who always advocates for the patient within the team. So she's embedded in our team to represent that voice. And I met her from doing a few public speeches, and she came up after the pitch sort of saying that I would love to just do anything to help because I need this. How can I help you to get this out, and how can I get it faster? So it was like, if you try, I feel like if students use these public engagement opportunities, like, don't be shy and leave the door open for everyone, but don't choose everyone. Be really picky. And I think that's probably a comment for myself, because I often a bit of a people pleaser, I'm just like, oh, I can't say no, but you have to say no. But yeah, like, it's been great so far.
Yeah, there's a very smart advice, especially for students who are looking for a team, because it's one of the common challenges initial stages founders they have in looking for the right co-founder.
One more tip.
Yeah.
Me and Hugo often disagree on like pretty much 80% of the things. Like, I know you guys might find it, like, not you, but like listeners might find it tempting to like find someone who you agree with all the time, like, oh, I get on with this person so well. She does really good work. It's not necessarily the right thing to look for, but it has to almost like, it might be hard, but you can think about it from a lot of angles. But what if an investor were to look at our startup, does our skill set make sense? So I have seen teams where there are 2 computer scientists, and that's no problem. But for example, like, we've had very positive comments from our potential investors because our skill set match up like that. So it doesn't have to be you replica. It can be the opposite of you, or like very different to you, as long as they keep you in check with the things that you find difficult, and you keep them in check, and you bring something different that, Hugo finds difficult. I feel like those are really like the important things to look for.
Yeah, thank you so much for your sharing your tips and advices with students. As you're proceeding ahead, I know you mentioned about you're at the testing phase of the Humin app. How do you see this going forward, as in terms of vision, in terms of coping up with the social issues? How do you see your vision coming forward in a couple of years ahead?
Yeah, so the big vision that I have, the big hairy ambition, is for us to be able to use our personal devices to make actual like precision mental health, like we do for targeted therapy for cancer, treatment for any physical illnesses, to be honest. At the moment, it's blanket statements, blanket treatment, hope for the best, trial and error. Honestly, it's atrocious, although we are trying our best. So my vision is to use the devices that we already have in a low cost way, but in a preventative, precise way, and in a personalized way. And the reason why we're doing what we're doing is because I know that the degree of personalization and precision at this rate of healthcare workers being available for mental health is just not possible. And that's why I believe AI is actually somewhere that can solve this sort of demand and availability issue. In the next few years, that's a really good question. I think the most important thing this year is to validate our product, whether it meets people's needs, right? And if not, then we just go back and iterate and go again. So that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing if we find out anything negative. So we are always looking for people who are willing to give their opinions, try it out, give us honest feedback, etc. We are looking at taking part in accelerators. They could be more time consuming than beneficial, let's say. We had interviews with Y Combinator last year, so we'll go again this year. And we've put in an application at KQ, which is a really good one, by the way, because they do convertible loans rather than dealing with equity from the get-go. So yeah, getting into one of those would be great this year. And next year, so one big thing moving on from this year to next year is raising pre-seed. So if all goes well and we demonstrate a strong product market fit, we will go for our pre-seed that we've been anticipating for. So we're expecting to raise about 450K as a pre-seed to help us launch into the wellness market and sort of fuel all the campaign and the marketing and the clinical advisory, etc. that will go ahead. So all about next year will be commercial launch and getting that growth curve started, which will be very hard. And the next year, we are looking at starting validation around clinical efficacy. So now that we've seen people use it for a year, what are the clinical impact of that we can produce into a trial? We're also already working with Young Minds Foundation, which is a charity that works with young people for mental health, to run a feasibility pilot end of this year or next year. But that's very much dependent on us winning grants to fund that. So we'll be working towards that as well. So yeah, stage 1, get our MVP product market fit done, look at raising pre-seed, make that commercial launch, and make sure that it is serving a need and it's starting to bring in solid revenue. And then the year after that, it's about clinical, raising Series A, and then going for medical device validation and running clinical trials, which will be very exciting.
I really hope it goes as per the plan, as per the vision you have in your mind. And if you want to put up any links related to the Humin app, you can just provide that in the description. And also for the audience, if they want to just have a look around with the Humin app at the platform right now, we'll provide the links altogether in the description below. Thank you so much for your time today. And as we come to the conclusion, do you have any tips and advices alongside what you have already shared to the students and the graduates who will be our aspiring entrepreneurs in the future? Yeah, and how they can manage the time alongside their academic commitments right now?
I mean, if you're sat here listening to this right now, I think you already know the answer. You have to just go and do it. Otherwise, how are you going to live with yourself? You'll regret it. And you do it now because we won't have time later. You just have to start somewhere, and just don't worry. Everything, what will happen if you fail? What will happen? Nothing will happen. So I just go for it. Don't wait for anyone. If people say oh, this is a saturated market, I mean, yeah, you need to listen to those advice, but it doesn't mean that your opinions are wrong. Listen to what you believe is right, and where you can, of course, go validate it with data, but keep going at it. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's yours. If everybody thought it would work, it would already be out, right? So you have to always remind yourself that you have to trust your guts. You have to trust yourself. About time commitments, I would like to say one more thing is you can't just win everything. You have to lose some as well. So I had to give up going to the gym, which was actually really hard for me, really sad. And that was a big part of my life. But, you've got to decide at some point that you can't do everything. So yeah, it's okay to have to give up something, and that's natural, but always please don't burn yourself out. At the end of the day, you come first. If you are unhappy, I believe the product will be as well, and the team will be as well. And people will be able to sense that around you. So always, I really hope the students don't forget that they come first, and yeah, do it out of fun. That's all from me, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Millie, for joining us today. We wish really all the best for your new app, and we hope that app goes very well and as per the plan. Thank you so much for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, that was me, Omkar Singh, signing off.